everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Louise and I make videos all about my life with scoliosis. For those of you who don't know, scoliosis is a sideways curvature of the spine. In my case, it was pretty severe, which means that I had to undergo spinal fusion surgery to correct my scoliosis about 12 years ago now. I now live my life with a fused spine from T3 to L3, which means that pretty much my whole spine is fused apart from 3 discs at the bottom. I also have 2 titanium rods and about 23 screws keeping everything in place. If you'd like to find out more about my scoliosis story, then I do have a video that goes into more detail all about that, including my diagnosis and my treatment as well. So if you've watched my channel or follow me on Instagram, you may know that I ran my first marathon, the Manchester Marathon, in April this year. And I do have a video all about that and the experience. If you're interested, then please give it a watch. I still can't believe that I ran a marathon because it's something that I never thought would be possible for me to do. What I wanted to do for this video is just share some of my personal tips for running a marathon if you have scoliosis or spinal fusion. Although I do think these tips will apply to anybody who's thinking about running their first marathon, whether you have scoliosis or not. Although I would like to point out that these are based on my own personal experiences with running, with having a spinal fusion. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a running coach or specialist, so if you are watching this and thinking that you want to get into running and you have scoliosis or spinal fusion, then please always check with your doctor first before starting any type of running or training program for a marathon, because the last thing you want to do is to injure yourself. My first tip for running a marathon with scoliosis or spinal fusion is strength training. I would probably say that strength training is crucial for anybody running a marathon or training for a marathon. But if you have scoliosis or spinal fusion, then it's even more important, because if you have scoliosis, you have certain muscle imbalances and certain muscles can get overworked as a result. And if you're upping the mileage following a marathon training plan, but you don't do any strength training, then you are at a real risk of injury. So to avoid injury, the best thing to do is to get yourself as strong as possible. Work with a physiotherapist if you can, work with a sports coach, and focus on exercises that strengthen your legs, your glutes, your core, to protect your lower back and to give you as much chance as possible to get through the training without injuring yourself. So for me, I did work with a run coach and I probably had more strength training than the average person would, and that was done on purpose to try and make sure that I compensated for the fact that I had certain weaknesses, for example. So I did quite a lot of strength training. I really made it a priority. I probably did about 4 sessions a week using resistance bands, doing glute exercises, things like that, single leg exercises, because I was really scared of getting injured. So I'd say the more strength training you can do, the better, especially if you have scoliosis. And the best thing to do is, like I say, to work with a physio or a running coach, somebody that knows the right exercises to complement the running and the marathon training. Alternatively, there are lots of options available on YouTube or online, but it's important to focus on exercises that are specific to running and the muscles that you use in running, so like the glute exercises and things like that, to give you the best chance of getting through the training without getting injured. My second tip would be to pace yourself. So by that I mean give yourself enough time to train. If you have never ran a marathon before, then I would say you need at least 6 months to train and slowly build up the mileage. The last thing that you want to be doing is cramming your training into a short amount of time, because that will just result in injury. So you need to give yourself as much time as possible to gradually build up those miles. And again, this is where it's really useful to work with a run coach or to follow a beginner's marathon training plan. Ideally, I would not recommend, if you have scoliosis or spinal fusion, or if you don't, I would not recommend doing a marathon until you have been running for some time and you've already run, say, the half marathon distance as well. Again, that's just to try and avoid injury and build up gradually. I started my training in December time, but I pretty much run every week anyway, so I already had a good base. But I started to specifically train for my marathon in December, and my marathon was in April. So that was about 5 months. But again, if you've never done a marathon before and you don't necessarily have that base, I would probably even suggest longer than that, just to build up the base first, because it's better to spread it out over as much time as you can, especially if you have scoliosis. And another thing that I mean by pacing yourself is, for me, I find it difficult to run on consecutive days. So I tend to get injured, and I have done recently, if I run every day or if I run a few days in a row. So for me, I spread out my training, so I knew that I had to do a long run at the weekend, but I wouldn't run the day before and I wouldn't run the day after. So I'd give myself time in between runs to give my body a bit of a break. So I'd spread out my runs. So I'd recommend not running on consecutive days if you can help it. And if you do run on consecutive days, then make the day after a longer run, for example, a recovery run. So make sure that you run a lot slower and give yourself time to recover. So running every day at the same pace, for me, is, I think my body doesn't like it, and it tends to cause injury when I do that. So I try to spread out the days that I run, and also complement running with other things as well, like walking, strength training, and not just doing running, because it's really good to mix it up a bit, especially if you have scoliosis. And the other thing that I mean by pacing yourself is not to run every run too quickly. So when you're marathon training, it's endurance training, it's a different type of running, so you don't need to be running every single run quickly. And the longer runs, in fact, need to be done slowly. So in my case, again, I worked with a coach who helped me with all of this, but I did a lot of my long runs at a very, for me, slow pace, so that I could still talk, I could still have a conversation, I wasn't exerting myself. And that's, again, important to avoid injury and to avoid burning yourself out. And if you do your longer run too quick, again, there's a risk of injury, but it's all relative, it's what's quick to you. But as a guide, it would be, the fact that you can have a conversation when you're running. So don't do every run too quick, and make sure you spread out your runs and make sure you give yourself enough time to build up slowly and gradually to your marathon date. My next tip is to make sure that you get some decent trainers. Now, this is crucial, especially if you have scoliosis, because if you're doing the kind of distances that you need to do when marathon training, you do need good support from trainers. So it's really important to get trainers that fit with what you'll be doing, i.e. long distances, but also give you enough support to reduce the risk of getting any injury. So what I did for my marathon training is, a few months before the marathon, I went to my local running shop and I explained that I was training for a marathon. I also told them about my scoliosis, and they did a gait analysis, which basically involves running on a treadmill. They film your legs and feet and how you run, and then they recommend the right trainers for you that give you the right amount of support. So these type of trainers can be expensive, but I really recommend, if you're doing those kind of distances, it's something that you really need. You can't really get away when you start doing marathon distances in just wearing any old trainers. You really do need trainers that are fit for purpose, really. I would also recommend as well that you train in the trainers that you're going to be running the marathon in. As they always say, nothing new on race day, and that is particularly true for trainers, because if you're not used to trainers that you're wearing on race day, then they could cause a lot of problems on the day. They could ruin your feet, which I've seen happen. They could cause injury because you've not trained in them. So always make sure that you train in the trainers that you're planning on wearing during the marathon. So my next tip is to make sure that you give yourself enough time to recover in between runs. Now, I've already covered this a little bit, but it's really important to spread out your runs. Make sure that you give yourself enough time to recover, especially after a long run. So like I said earlier in the video, if I did a long run, for example, on a Saturday, I probably wouldn't run for a few days just to give myself time to recover. And if I did run, it would be very short, very slow, or even a walk rather than a run, just to make sure that I recover following that harder session. As well, I always used to make sure that after a very long run, I would have a hot bath, for example, with some Epsom salts in and some bubbles, and just relax my muscles for about half an hour or so. After a long run, it's really important to take the time to recover if you can. Another thing as well is yoga and stretches are really important to do after a run, after any run really, but especially the long run, and especially when marathon training, it's really important to include some stretches and some yoga at least a couple of times a week, because your body does get very tight, your muscles get very sore. And another thing that you can do if you can afford it is to go for regular sports massages while you're marathon training. So again, I did do this. I went for, I think, about 2 while I was marathon training. And again, that really helps to just get all the muscles flushed out, and it really does make a difference, and it can prevent injury. So it's just thinking about things that you can do to help yourself recover in between the training sessions, especially after the long runs, because recovery is just as important than the long run sessions. And if you don't recover properly, it can mean that you're more prone to injuries. My next tip is to not compare yourself to others. This is really important for anybody training for a marathon, not just those that have scoliosis, but I was really guilty of this, comparing myself and what I was doing to what other people were doing in my run club or on social media, because there's a lot of people training for marathons generally at the same time, and it's really easy to compare, for example, your pace to somebody else's pace, or what sessions they're doing, and worry that you're falling behind, which is what I was guilty of. But you have to remember that everybody is at different levels, and especially if you're a beginner as well, you have to do what works for you and the pace that works for you as well. Like, you don't want to be going too quick, you don't want to be doing too much and injuring yourself. So you have to trust the process and try not to compare what you're doing to what other people are doing, because everybody is different and everybody's at different stages and different levels as well. So my final tip is, if you can afford it, because it can be pricey, but it's really, really worthwhile working with an experienced run coach to help during the marathon training process, because it's a big thing. It puts a lot of pressure on your body, especially if you have scoliosis as well. So working with a professional that does this all the time can really put your mind at ease, knowing that you're doing things properly, you're less likely to injure yourself as well, working with a coach. And for me, it was reassurance as well that I was doing the right things and training enough and that sort of thing. So I wanted to give myself the best possible chance of being able to complete the marathon without getting injured. And I did train for a marathon before the pandemic, but then it got cancelled because it was just as the pandemic started, and then it was moved again to this year. And when I initially trained, I didn't use a coach, I just did it on my own, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't do enough strength training at all. I did a lot of my longer runs far too quickly, and I did end up getting injured right before the marathon, but it was moved. So luckily, I don't think that if I had have done that marathon, I think I would have struggled. But this time, because I worked with a coach and learnt all of these tips, I felt a lot stronger, and I didn't get injured throughout the whole process of training and running the marathon. And I actually enjoyed the marathon itself. I got through the marathon at a very consistent pace, and I finished in a really good time, and I finished strong. And I think, you know, all of these things that I learned working with the run coach helped me to achieve that. I don't think I would have been as strong otherwise. So I think for me it really did help. I know it's not for everybody and it does depend on budgets and things like that, but I would recommend, if you can, if it's available to you, then working with an experienced coach is very beneficial. If not, then following a training plan, there are lots available online, but maybe tailoring it more to yourself. So if you have scoliosis, maybe upping the strength training a little bit, maybe reducing some of the runs or moving things around so you have more rests in between, but just making it work for you. You don't have to follow what's on there rigidly. You can move things around and make things work for you. These are just some of my tips for marathon training with scoliosis, and they're obviously based on my own personal experiences. If there's anything I've missed, or you have scoliosis yourself and you've trained for a marathon, or you've run a marathon, or you run, if you've got anything else that you'd like to add, please let me know in the comments below. But like I say, these are based on my experiences. I'm not a qualified run coach, although I do have quite a lot of experience now with running. I've ran a lot of half marathons. I'm a member of a run club and I work with a run coach quite closely, so I've picked up a lot of knowledge over the years, although I'm not qualified. So like I said before, don't take what I say as gospel. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please feel free to subscribe. I try to upload monthly videos about my life with scoliosis, my experiences with running with scoliosis, and my fundraising activities as well. So if you're interested in regular content like this, then please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.